In the arid heart of West Texas, where the wind carries red dust between time-worn fences, Ellie Mae walks down the dirt road towards the Braddock Ranch. Her calloused hands grip a tattered suitcase, the sole remnant of a life that shattered when her husband died in the Amarillo rodeo. The September sun burns relentlessly on her tanned skin, but she holds her shoulders straight, her eyes fixed on the property emerging on the horizon. Thomas Braddock waits on the porch, a somber figure silhouetted against the endless sky. At 50, he carries 2 decades of self-imposed solitude since losing his wife. He watches the new cook approach with thinly veiled suspicion. The ranch has functioned well without a female presence for so long that he questions his own decision. But he needs someone to cook, and she came with good references. Nothing more than that, he convinces himself, as his blue eyes study her every step down the dusty road that cuts through his property like a scar. The first days on the ranch unfold in heavy silences and measured glances. Ellie Mae wakes before dawn, when the stars still gleam faintly in the Texas sky, and brews coffee as black as tar for the hands. Jake, the 40-year-old foreman with a grizzled mustache, observes her skeptically as she seasons scrambled eggs with jalapeno. "A woman in the kitchen brings trouble," he mutters to Billy, the young cowboy in his early 20s. Thomas appears promptly at 6, eats in absolute silence, and leaves without a word of approval or criticism. She serves simple but flavorful dishes, grilled steaks, refried beans with bacon, corn tortillas. The food disappears from the plates, but no one comments. During the scorching afternoons, she washes dishes in the enameled iron sink, watching the men work with the cattle through the window. A sense of invisibility follows her like a persistent shadow. Here, she is merely a function, not a person. But she continues to cook with care, seasoning each dish with silent dignity. The 3rd week arrived, heavy with stifling heat and unspoken tensions. Ellie Mae notices how Thomas avoids looking directly at her, how his steps have become heavier when she is nearby. In the small dining room with dark wood walls, the atmosphere during meals resembles a wake. Jake and Billy chew in silence, exchanging occasional glances. She decides to prepare something different: slow-roasted beef with chipotle sauce, accompanied by fresh cornbread and vinegar-dressed coleslaw. The aroma fills the house, escaping through the window cracks. Thomas enters promptly, but hesitates for a second when he smells it. His fingers tremble almost imperceptibly as he pulls out his chair. Ellie serves the plates with precise, unhurried movements. Thomas's first forkful pauses in the air. His eyes close for an instant, as if a painful memory had just resurfaced from the depths of his wounded soul. The silence deepens, laden with unexpressed meanings. In that moment, suspended in time, something fundamental transforms. Thomas chews slowly, each flavor awakening memories he buried 20 years ago. Margaret used to prepare this same dish on special Sundays when they would laugh together on the porch watching the sunset. His eyes finally lift, meeting Ellie Mae's for the first time since her arrival. They are tear-filled, vulnerable, stripped of their usual hardness. She does not look away, holding that moment of mutual recognition with serenity. Jake stops chewing, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Billy lowers his fork, sensing that something important has just happened. Words are not needed. In the silent language of that worn wooden table, Thomas finally sees Ellie Mae not as a temporary replacement or mere employee, but as someone who understands the pain of loss and the art of rebuilding hope through simple gestures. Recognition flows between them like an underground river, deep and transformative. The following dawn breaks differently over the Braddock Ranch. When Ellie Mae comes down to the kitchen at 5 in the morning, she finds Thomas already awake, clumsily making coffee. "Thought I'd help," he murmurs, avoiding her gaze but with a softer tone. During breakfast, she notices he has placed 2 plates on the main table side by side, instead of keeping his isolated spot at the head. Jake and Billy notice the change, exchanging discreet glances of approval. Thomas still doesn't talk much, but his words, when they come, are directed at her, asking about seasonings or discreetly praising the taste of the biscuits. In the afternoon, she finds him mending the back fence and offers him fresh water. He accepts, drinking slowly while watching her skilled hands hold the glass. "Margaret used to make cornbread similar to yours," he finally says, and it's the first time he's mentioned his deceased wife in her presence. Ellie nods, understanding that this is his way of saying that she belongs there now, not as a replacement, but as a new presence that deserves her own space in the ranch's wounded heart. 3 months later, as the Texas autumn paints the few trees golden, Ellie Mae and Thomas share not only meals but also conversations at sunset on the porch. She continues to cook with the same care, but now her dishes carry something new, the certainty of being appreciated. Thomas has learned to smile again, timidly at first, then more naturally. Jake comments to Billy that he's never seen the boss so at peace. The silences between them are no longer heavy with tension, but with mutual understanding. During dinners where once coldness reigned, now there are discreet jokes, plans for ranch improvements, stories from the past shared without bitterness. Ellie Mae found more than work. She discovered a place where her presence matters, where her skills are valued, and where she can rebuild a life with meaning. Thomas, in turn, learned that the heart can harbor new affections without betraying precious memories. Sometimes, the deepest recognition happens even in silence, when two wounded souls meet and decide to walk together towards healing, seasoned with patience, respect, and the renewed hope that better days will come. The Texas winter arrived with biting winds that whistled through the fence posts, bringing icy gusts that made the main house windows rattle in their frames. Ellie Mae woke before dawn, as always, but found the kitchen uncommonly cold. The heater had broken down during the night, leaving the house plunged into a low temperature that seeped into her bones. Her numb fingers struggled to light the wood-burning stove, while the steam of her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. Thomas came down earlier than usual, drawn by the clanking of utensils. He found her shivering while preparing coffee, rubbing her hands to warm them. Without a word, he brought his leather coat and placed it over her shoulders. "Wear this," he murmured, avoiding her grateful eyes. The simple gesture carried the weight of growing intimacy, a care that transcended merely professional relations. Jake and Billy arrived for coffee to find the boss and cook sharing warmth near the stove, talking softly about necessary house repairs. The snowstorm that hit West Texas that week was historic. Dense flakes covered pastures and roads, completely isolating the ranch from the outside world. Thomas organized the hands to protect the cattle in makeshift shelters, while Ellie Mae transformed the kitchen into a command center. She prepared hearty soups, steaming stews, and strong coffee that circulated in thermoses among the men working in the cold. For 3 days, they lived practically confined, sharing stories around the fireplace in the main living room. That was when Thomas talked about Margaret for the first time without pain in his eyes, describing how she loved to see the first snow of the year. Ellie Mae spoke about her deceased husband, about interrupted dreams and overcome fears. Jake contributed anecdotes from other harsh winters, while Billy admired how these very different people had become an unlikely family. The intimacy forced by nature revealed deep layers of each personality, creating bonds that fair weather had not managed to weave alone. When the snow melted and the roads became passable again, news arrived that shook the newly found tranquility. Margaret had a sister in Dallas who had never approved of Thomas's isolation. Sarah Caldwell appeared without warning, driving a black Cadillac that sharply contrasted with the ranch's rustic simplicity. A 55-year-old woman with gray hair pulled back in a rigid bun, expensive clothes, and urban manners, she inspected Ellie Mae with thinly veiled disapproval. "Thomas, we need to talk about your domestic arrangements," she declared during dinner, completely ignoring the cook. Ellie Mae served roasted lamb with potatoes, but the tense atmosphere made the meal heavy as lead. Sarah subtly criticized every aspect of ranch life, from the simplicity of the food to the inappropriate presence of a single woman living there. Thomas maintained an awkward silence, torn between loyalty to the past and protection of the present. Jake and Billy sensed the silent battle being waged and discreetly positioned themselves beside Ellie Mae. The inevitable confrontation occurred the following morning, when Sarah tried to convince Thomas to sell the ranch and move to Dallas. "Margaret wouldn't want to see you buried in this God-forsaken place," she argued, pointing at Ellie Mae, who was making coffee. "And she certainly wouldn't approve of this ambiguous situation." Thomas felt his blood boil. 20 years of guilt and self-imposed isolation suddenly crystallized into anger directed at whoever was trying to control his life. "Margaret has been dead for 2 decades, he responded with a sharp voice that echoed through the kitchen. "And I am alive. Ellie Mae brought life back into this house, something none of you family members managed to do." Sarah paled at her brother-in-law's unprecedented firmness. Ellie Mae stopped stirring the coffee, her heart racing as she heard Thomas defend her publicly for the first time. Jake and Billy smiled discreetly, knowing that the boss had finally found the courage to choose his own path. The decision was made. Sarah could leave, but Ellie Mae would stay. The ranch had found a new soul, and Thomas a new reason to live fully. Sarah left that same afternoon, promising never to return and taking with her the last vestiges of guilt that anchored Thomas to the past. He and Ellie Mae stood on the porch watching the Cadillac disappear down the dusty road, enveloped in a silence charged with relief and possibilities. "Thank you for defending me," she finally said, her soft voice filled with sincere gratitude. Thomas turned to face her, noticing how the afternoon sun gilded her brown hair and highlighted the serene strength in her eyes. "You transformed this place," he replied, words coming with difficulty after years of emotional muteness. "Margaret is part of my history, but you are my present." That confession, simple yet profound, sealed something that had been quietly growing between them for months. Jake appeared to inform them about cattle matters, but sensed the intimate moment and discreetly withdrew. Billy waved from a distance, understanding that he was witnessing the birth of something special. The ranch breathed differently, as if decades of sadness had finally found healing through the discreet and respectful love that blossomed between 2 wounded people who learned to heal each other. A year later, at the same dinner where Ellie Mae had been silently acknowledged for the first time, Thomas solemnly rose at the end of the meal. Jake and Billy, now permanent parts of that chosen family, waited expectantly. He walked to her chair, took a small case from his shirt pocket, and knelt before her with trembling but determined hands. "Ellie Mae, you taught me that a heart can love again without forgetting who it loved before," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The ring was simple, a plain gold band, exactly as she liked things, honest and unostentatious. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Yes," and Jake clapped enthusiastically while Billy whistled his approval. At that table where once deadly coldness reigned, now shone the warmth of a true family. The recognition that began in silence had blossomed into deep love, built on solid foundations of mutual respect, understanding, and patience. West Texas witnessed another everyday miracle. 2 lonely souls who found a home in each other, seasoning life with renewed hope. The small Methodist church in Cedar Ridge was decorated with sunflowers and wild roses that Ellie Mae had gathered from the fields around the ranch. Pastor Wilson, a 60-year-old man with a grizzled beard and warm smile, awaited the couple at the simple wooden altar that had served the community for 3 generations. Thomas wore his best navy suit, the same one he had worn to his wedding with Margaret decades ago, but now it carried a different meaning. Not painful nostalgia, but honor for the past while embracing the future. Ellie Mae walked down the aisle in a simple white dress she had sewn herself, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Jake served as best man, as proud as a father to see his boss finally happy. Billy played the guitar discreetly, a soft melody echoing through the walls of the church, packed with curious neighbors and genuine friends. The ceremony was brief but emotional, with sincere vows that made even the toughest cowboys discreetly wipe their eyes. When Thomas kissed his bride, warm applause echoed through the small nave, celebrating not only a union, but the rebirth of 2 lives that had learned to love again. The honeymoon breakfast took place in the ranch kitchen itself, a tradition Ellie Mae had insisted on maintaining. As newlyweds, they prepared pancakes together for the first time, laughing when the first one burned at the bottom of the pan. Thomas discovered he had a knack for scrambled eggs while she taught him to season bacon. Jake and Billy were invited to join, transforming an intimate meal into a family celebration. "The boss is different," Jake commented to Billy while Thomas helped Ellie Mae wash dishes, a gesture unthinkable months ago. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows, illuminating a domestic scene that seemed ordinary, but carried the weight of a profound transformation. In the afternoon, the couple walked through the fields hand in hand, planning improvements to the property and dreaming of a shared future. Thomas showed her special places on the ranch that he had never revealed to anyone. A spring hidden among rocks, an ancient tree where he used to meditate, a hill from which he could see the entire expanse of his lands. Ellie Mae absorbed every detail, understanding that he was finally opening all compartments of his soul. 6 months of marriage brought a comfortable routine and daily discoveries. Ellie Mae transformed the house's porch into an aromatic garden, cultivating herbs that revolutionized the flavor of their meals. Thomas learned to appreciate fresh basil in his salad and oregano in their Sunday pasta sauce. They established a tradition of special Friday dinners, when she would meticulously prepare elaborate dishes and he would choose wine from the small cellar he built in the basement. Jake and Billy got their own room in the staff house that Thomas renovated, but continued to dine at the main table as family. On cold nights, everyone gathered in the living room around the fireplace, playing cards or listening to the radio. Ellie Mae embroidered while Thomas read the newspaper aloud, commenting on political and economic news that affected ranching. Billy learned chess with Jake while they discussed strategies for the next cattle breeding season. The house breathed a harmony that contrasted sharply with the sepulchral silence of previous years. Neighbors began to comment on the radical change in the rancher's temperament. He now greeted people in town and even smiled occasionally. The first great test of the marriage came with the arrival of the scorching summer, when a prolonged drought threatened pastures and water reservoirs. Thomas spent days observing the relentlessly blue sky, worried about the survival of the herd. Ellie Mae noticed the growing tension in her husband's shoulders, the way he grumbled during meals, and woke in the middle of the night to check on the cattle. One night, she found him on the porch at 3 a.m, contemplating constellations in search of signs of rain. Without a word, she brought him hot coffee and sat beside him. "We'll get through this together," she simply said, her hand resting on his. Thomas felt a lump in his throat as he realized a fundamental difference. This time, he wouldn't face the crisis alone. For the following weeks, they worked side by side, implementing water conservation strategies, rationing supplies, and keeping spirits high among the staff. Jake and Billy admired how the mistress of the house proved strong in difficult times, organizing a neighborhood work bee to share resources. When the rains finally arrived in August, everyone celebrated on the porch, watching the beneficial storm wash over the parched land. Ellie Mae and Thomas danced in the rain, wet and laughing like teenagers in love. Autumn brought a generous harvest and profits that allowed for expansions planned months ago. Thomas decided to build a new barn and renovate the main house, projects he enthusiastically discussed with Ellie Mae during morning coffee. She suggested a larger kitchen with a central island and a spacious pantry to house the preserves she intended to make. Jake proposed improvements to the back fence, while Billy dreamed of a modern stable for horses. During nightly family meetings, they sketched plans on brown paper, debating every detail with the passion of amateur architects. Ellie Mae revealed an unexpected talent for decoration, visualizing how new spaces could better function for their shared life. Thomas discovered pleasure in planning a shared future, a striking contrast to decades of mere solitary survival. Neighbors commented on the visible prosperity of Braddock Ranch, not just financial, but emotional. The couple began to receive invitations to dinners and community parties, a social life Thomas had avoided for 20 years. Ellie Mae shone at these events, chatting naturally with other ranchers' wives and exchanging recipes. Thomas, in turn, found that he enjoyed discussing cattle techniques and the agricultural market with colleagues. 2 years after that silent dinner that changed everything, Ellie Mae woke feeling morning sickness that she initially attributed to the flu. When symptoms persisted for a week, Thomas insisted on taking her to the doctor in town. Dr. Martinez, a young man who had recently arrived from the big city, examined her carefully before smiling and announcing, "Congratulations, you're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was different from those tense first days on the ranch. It was a silence of absolute surprise, incredible joy, a future instantly redefined. Thomas held his wife's hand tightly, his eyes welling up for the second time since they met. Jake and Billy received the news with an impromptu celebration in the kitchen, toasting with cold beer while planning how to turn the extra room into a nursery. In the following months, Thomas became an overprotective husband, insisting that Ellie Mae rest while he took on various household chores. She laughed at his excessive worrying, but felt loved and cared for in a way she had never experienced before. The entire ranch prepared for the arrival of the first baby in decades, renewing a life cycle that seemed interrupted by tragedy. At that silent dinner, mutual recognition had planted a seed that was now blossoming into a complete family. Ellie Mae's pregnancy transformed the ranch's atmosphere into constant anticipation. Thomas built a nursery in the room next to the master bedroom, painting the walls a soft yellow while she sewed diapers and tiny clothes. Jake and Billy took turns helping with the heavier kitchen tasks, insisting that the future mom rest whenever possible. During hot afternoons, she sat on the porch with needlework, watching her husband tend to the cattle with redoubled attention, as if the property's prosperity depended on the baby's health. Dr. Martinez visited monthly, always pleased with the pregnancy's progress. "A strong child like the parents," he joked, as his stethoscope revealed vigorous heartbeats. Thomas accompanied every appointment, asking technical questions that amused the young doctor. Neighbors brought handmade gifts, crocheted blankets, carved wooden toys, clothes embroidered with the care of experienced grandmothers. The entire community celebrated the imminent birth, especially since everyone had witnessed the radical transformation of the reclusive rancher into a happy and sociable man. Ellie Mae blossomed in the loving attention, feeling truly a part of that arid land that now pulsed with new life. Winter arrived more harshly than usual, bringing ice storms that kept the family confined for consecutive days. Ellie Mae, now in her 8th month, moved with increasing difficulty, but insisted on cooking comforting meals that warmed the men's bodies and souls. Thomas rarely left her side, worried about the possibility of labor starting during the forced isolation. Jake organized basic medical supplies that Dr. Martinez had recommended for emergencies, while Billy maintained radio communication with the nearest town. During long nights around the fireplace, Thomas read aloud books on childcare that he had borrowed from the municipal library. Ellie Mae knitted tiny bonnets, smiling as she imagined the baby wearing her creations. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" Billy asked for the 100th time. "It doesn't matter as long as it's healthy," she replied, her hands caressing her prominent belly. Jake bet on a boy, predicting a future cowboy to continue the ranch's traditions. Thomas secretly hoped for a girl, imagining a feminine version of Ellie Mae's serene strength. The storms finally subsided when February arrived, opening roads for a reassuring visit from the doctor who confirmed everything was progressing perfectly for the imminent birth. On a sunny March morning, while Thomas was checking on cattle in the distant fields, Ellie Mae felt the first strong contraction that made her drop the basket of eggs in the kitchen. Jake, who was calmly drinking coffee, jumped from his chair when he saw her leaning on the counter, breathing heavily. "Billy, go get the boss now," he yelled as he helped her sit down. The young cowboy rode his horse faster than he ever had, galloping through the fields until he found Thomas mending a broken fence. "Boss, it's time," he yelled from a distance. Thomas abandoned his tools where they lay, mounted his horse and galloped towards the house, his heart pounding uncontrollably. He found Ellie Mae walking around the room, counting the intervals between contractions with a mathematical precision that impressed him. "Calm down, Thomas," she said, noticing the panic in his eyes. "We still have time." Jake had already dispatched Billy to get Dr. Martinez in town, while preparing clean towels and warm water according to medical instructions. Thomas held his wife's hand, marveling at her strength even in such an intense moment. For the next few hours, the entire house pulsed with anticipation as nature followed the inevitable course of creating new life. Dr. Martinez arrived as the sun began to set, finding Ellie Mae in advanced but controlled labor. Thomas was banished from the room at her insistence, as she preferred privacy for such an intimate moment. He spent hours pacing nervously on the porch, faithfully followed by Jake and Billy, who tried to distract him with conversation about anything but what everyone was thinking. "A strong woman like her won't have any trouble," Jake muttered for the 10th time. Babies have been born for thousands of years, Billy added, more to convince himself. When the first sharp cry echoed through the house at dusk, 3 tough men hugged each other on the porch, relieved and emotional. Dr. Martinez appeared minutes later, smiling broadly. Congratulations, Dad. A beautiful and healthy girl. Thomas entered the room with shaky legs, finding Ellie Mae exhausted but radiant, holding a pink bundle that was crying vigorously. Margaret Rose, she whispered, looking into her husband's eyes. A tribute to the past, a promise of the future. Thomas touched his daughter's tiny face, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. That moment sealed a complete circle of renewal that had begun with silent recognition years ago. The first few months with Margaret Rose transformed the family dynamic in a surprising way. Thomas discovered a natural talent for diapers and night feedings, sharing care with Ellie Mae, who nursed while he rocked the restless baby. Jake became an honorary grandfather, building a rocking cradle on the porch where the little one slept entire afternoons, lulled by the Texas breeze. Billy revealed an unexpected vocation for lullabies, his deep voice surprisingly melodious as he sang songs he had learned from his deceased mother. The ranch's routine naturally adapted to the child's schedule. Heavier tasks took place during long naps, while gentle chores filled waking periods. Neighbors visited regularly to admire the miracle of Braddock Ranch, as everyone called the birth that symbolized the complete rebirth of the property. Ellie Mae blossomed in motherhood, discovering reserves of energy she didn't know she possessed. Thomas was often found simply watching his wife nurse their daughter, an expression of absolute contentment replacing decades of melancholy. Jake joked that he had never seen the boss so silly, but admired the transformation of the man he considered an older brother. Billy began talking about finding a wife of his own, inspired by the example of domestic happiness he witnessed daily. When Margaret Rose celebrated her first birthday, a party organized by Ellie Mae brought the entire community together at the ranch. Long tables were set up in the courtyard, laden with dishes prepared by neighboring wives who rivaled each other in culinary demonstrations. Thomas roasted an entire pig on a spit, a technique learned from Jake during preparations that lasted a whole week. The girl, now walking with wobbly but determined steps, charmed guests with her already well-defined personality, curious like her father, sweet like her mother, stubborn like both. During an impromptu speech, Thomas publicly thanked everyone who had witnessed the journey, from isolation to a complete family. His voice choked as he first mentioned Margaret, honoring her memory without pain, and then Ellie Mae, celebrating the present with deep gratitude. Jake raised an emotional toast. To the Braddock family, who taught us that it's never too late to start over. Billy played the guitar as couples danced under the stars, Margaret Rose sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. That celebration marked not only the child's birthday, but the definitive consolidation of a new era for the ranch that had learned to love again. The silent recognition of years past had blossomed into a legacy of hope that would span generations, proving that second chances can be more precious than first opportunities.